Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and welcome to another episode of ISTJ Info Dumping. Feel free to let me know in the comments section what you think about this episode, because that's what we're here to talk about. How do ISTJs handle criticism? I would like to think that we handle criticism decently well by thinking type standards, as the ones that are higher up in thinking have this tendency to think that they're always right. But ISTJs, on the other hand, have a very, very interesting pattern that the only other type that can identify with it is the INFP, where we have introverted sensing and introverted feeling. And because they're a dominant tertiary combination, which again, the INFP has that, but the other way around, we tend to get into what's called avoidant personality disorder, where once something has happened in the past that has hurt us, we go to great lengths to ensure that that never happens again. So even though avoidant personality disorder is most commonly associated with friendships that have gone wrong, and therefore the ISTJ or INFP will want to avoid those kinds of friendships, it can also work for criticism as well. Let's say that the ISTJ wrote a manuscript and he or she was super proud of their work, and then they showed it to a friend and the friend said, "Well, this stinks." The ISTJ is naturally going to feel a little bit offended, especially if the person doesn't give words of how to improve the manuscript. The ISTJ is going to say, "But I worked hours on that manuscript, even days. I even lost sleep over that. How can you say that I didn't put 100% of my effort in?" And there's the kicker that you have to keep in mind with inferior intuition, is that ISTJs are naturally going to miss the fine print. They're not going to be able to look between the lines and say, "Oh, I see, this person is not a literature expert, so maybe that was the wrong person to give the manuscript to." Their automatic gut reaction is going to say, "Are you disapproving of my work?" So, generally speaking, when ISTJs are criticized, they need people to fill in the blanks that their inferior intuition can't fill in, so that the ISTJ can take the criticism properly. If someone just hits the dislike button on an ISTJ's video, they're probably just going to laugh. At least that's what I do. I don't know, maybe there's an ISTJ out there that has a more involved channel than me, but I just laugh because I think that that's a form of cowardice. I think, well, if they really disliked the video so much, but they wanted to see more videos of mine, they would have written in the comment section how I might improve and what I did wrong, so that maybe I can do it better next time if it's within my grasp. Now, if you give an ISTJ unrealistic criticism, they're just going to dismiss it altogether. Like if you say something along the lines of, "Your voice stinks," we'll be like, "Well, too bad. That's how my voice is." But if you say something along the lines of, "Paul, maybe if you slowed down your speech so that people can understand what you're saying," well, you're going to have to make sure that you're very precise in how the ISTJ has to change, or, as in the example above, they're probably going to take it too literally or not literally enough, because again, pint-sized intuition is not going to know how to fill in the blanks and read between the lines. So instead, their introverted sensing, extroverted thinking is going to say, "Talk slower." But how much slower? You're not giving me any indication of the precise amount that you're looking for. So in the long run, if you're not precise about your criticism, the ISTJ is not going to take it very well. That being said, ISTJs are their own worst critics. And I think of all of the Myers-Briggs types, I could be wrong, but from my understanding, it seems like the ISTJs are by far the types that beat themselves up the most. If an ISTJ makes a mistake, no one is going to hate the ISTJ more than the ISTJ themselves. In fact, a lot of times ISTJs exaggerate the problem that they did because, I'm a broken record at this point, the inferior intuition is not going to know how to take into account that maybe the past was a different scenario and things have evolved, because they are constantly stuck in the past, so they don't expect the future to evolve either, because ISTJs don't like evolving. So if an ISTJ, say, failed to give an adequate greeting to someone when they were 10 and were told off for their lack of manners, they're not going to necessarily naturally take into account, well, now I'm 42 and now I'm so much better at communicating. Instead, they're going to say, I failed when I was 10, so therefore I'm always going to fail. So as a result, that's why ISTJs need a lot of positive affirmation from people. Of course, they won't want to admit it, but I think deep down inside they want it, they just don't know how to word it. But ISTJs really need people to do the opposite of criticism and affirm them. But rather than just affirming them and leaving it at that a lot of feeling types, especially the introverted ones, like to do, ISTJs need specific affirmation that can also be traced to a realistic source. So an example of bad affirmation to an ISTJ: oh my gosh, you're amazing and you're a great person. How am I amazing? How am I a great person? That's so vague. Can you please be more specific? Instead, a good affirmation to an ISTJ is, you know what, Paul? I think that you are really good at communicating because you make sure that the other person understands what you are saying. I understand what you're saying, and therefore you are very precise and I don't get confused when you talk. In that respect, you're laying it out so that the ISTJ can properly start feeling it in their chest, or in the ISTJ's case, they feel things more in their brain than their own hearts. So their brain can say, a rush of dopamine has hit me. I can actually take that compliment. It also helps if when you criticize the ISTJ, you make sure that you don't go overboard in the criticism. That's the problem that a lot of the dominant thinkers have, is they tend to make their criticisms as more of like a poem. Like they might say, you are an insignificant ant that I can crush under my feet. And the ISTJ is like, pretty sure I'm too big for you to crush me under my feet. So unless if I was actually a midget, that wouldn't be possible. Instead, if you make your criticism along the lines of, okay, Paul, so you didn't quite mop up the floor correctly. Allow me to grab the mop and show you how to do it, and I have professional credentials. So I'm going from a source that is known for professional cleaning as opposed to cleaning on the side. So therefore, I've verified that the advice I'm giving you is valid as opposed to this just being my opinion. So not only are you being precise in showing the ISTJ what they did wrong, but you're also citing a higher power, which we extroverted thinkers love our higher powers. We love our policemen. We love our authorities. We love government officials. Well, we love the fact that government officials try to make a peaceful society. We don't always like the decisions they make because dominant thinking can often lead to corruption, and ISTJs don't like corruption. But I think the hardest thing an ISTJ takes as criticism is if they're told that they're mean. That's where I think the ISTJ takes great offense, because their combination of extroverted thinking and introverted sensing means that they're going to want to follow what's been familiar to them, but the extroverted thinking is also going to want to make sure that they follow societal rules and societal trends. So if something has worked in the past that the ISTJ has personally seen, they're going to want to follow it to the T and not even want to break it in the slightest. So common courtesy is a big one. If the ISTJ knows the rules of common courtesy and they are still told, wow, you're a real meanie, you really just hurt that person's feelings. Usually for me, if someone says that to me, there's two reactions that I get. The first one is, oh no, not again. What if I'm kicked out of the next event? What if I'm put into jail because of the things that I did? What if that causes an unfriending? Because that's what's happened in the past when people have criticized me for it, and the pint-sized extroverted intuition is not going to know how to say, this time is different, Paul. This time is different. Relax. The person you've met is mature. In the moment, we're in the grip of our inferior function, which also means that the tertiary function is going to be going on overdrive as well. So the introverted feeling is going to say, through my fault, through my fault, through my most grievous fault, and not in the way that the Catholic Church does it. They are going to beat themselves up so hard, and they're going to try overly hard to amend their mistake. Or maybe that's just me, but I'd like to think that ISTJs don't like being failures in general, and if they don't meet the person's needs, then considering the fact that we often are butlers and servants and slaves, we're going to find that as a failure of duty, really. Like, if an ISTJ is serving their master and the master says, "You disappoint me, my servant, by your lack of etiquette," then the servant is going to beat themselves up and study up in the library a book on etiquette and say, okay, how am I going to make sure that I don't make that mistake again? The second reaction that I normally have if someone says that to me is more along the lines of who the person is, and therefore if I don't know the person, then I'm not really going to take the criticism at all, because I like to joke around. You guys know that. Everyone knows that I joke, but my humor tends to be very sarcastic, self-deprecating, and sometimes just flat out blunt. Like, I might go into a chat on someone else's live stream and say, "Oh good, this chat is full of non-drama. If someone dramatic gets here, we can put a dunce cap on them." And so it's my way of just bluntly saying I don't like drama. And a lot of times that makes people laugh. But a lot of times when I tell people, like, "Oh, look at the funny joke I just told," they're like, "Paul, that wasn't funny, that was outright rude." I'll be like, they don't know me. They really can't judge my humor based on a simple interaction. So I guess you could say for the ISTJ, they're more likely to just say whatever if it's someone they don't know. But if it's someone that they do know, that deep-seated loyalty, especially if the ISTJ is older and they've developed their tertiary function, they're probably going to hold back on the bluntness just ever so slightly. I don't think an ISTJ will ever sugarcoat their words, and if they do, it's going to come with a great amount of straining. But if an ISTJ really cares about you, they're going to probably try to over-explain what they're saying to make sure that even if they are being blunt, that they'll say something like, "Well, don't take it personally, for crying out loud, I'm just speaking my mind," or "Stop being so whiny, I'm just talking. Like, if I really wanted to insult you, I would have told you that I was insulting you to begin with." And I think that's the thing that most people misunderstand about ISTJs. I also think it's partly our own fault for not being clearer when we already try so hard to be clear. That's a contradiction. But a lot of times an ISTJ will make it very clear when they want to insult someone, but people who have higher feeling are not going to be able to take that into account in the moment. They're just going to be hurt and not be able to say, "Oh, right, that's just how the ISTJ talks." They just say it like it is. ISTJs, when they are criticizing someone, they tend to say, "Well, let me tell you what you did wrong," or make it pretty darn obvious, or they'll say, like, "You are hopeless at observation." But if they're saying something along the lines of, like, "Wow, you just went past a stop sign," that is a neutral comment. That's something more of observing what happened. Now, most of the time, people with higher intuition are going to say, "That must be an insult, because that's showing that I don't have observation skills." That's you using your intuition. ISTJs don't use intuition. Instead, they use sensing, which means that they're observing what is. And so, as a result, maybe ISTJs need to learn how to zip it at times and not be constantly having a monologue. But I would say that the vast majority of the time, we have a hard time keeping our observations to ourselves. And over the years, we sometimes learn to, but sometimes we just like to speak what's on our mind because that's what helps us process things. Our extroverted feeling is extroverted for a reason. Sometimes we finalize thoughts as we're speaking. So a lot of times when we're making an observation in the moment, that's helping us to improve because we're an external processor. The INFJs in the world can't understand that very much because they're introverted thinkers. To them, they need time to process their thoughts. They need time to say, what is the best way to word this? What does this logical situation mean? ISTJs, on the other hand, are saying, if I don't say it, I'm not going to understand it. So they're not the types that are going to deeply ponder over things. So you might be thinking, well, how do I take ISTJ criticism? Well, for starters, look at the wording that the ISTJ uses and try to see if they use words like you, your, and what the heck. So that way it's more obvious if the ISTJ is directly attacking your character versus making an observation. So if the ISTJ uses more pronouns that have to do with you, like, oh my gosh, you're so hopeless, you've got proper noun, as in referring to you, but then you've also got the adjective of hopeless. However, if you were to notice that the ISTJ uses a lot of external surroundings, then it's more likely that they're just talking. Like if they say something along the lines of, well, you must not have been able to read the stop sign. You see how there's another noun in the ISTJ sentence? Because there's another noun, you can say to yourself, maybe the ISTJ is just talking about their environment and just making an observation. Now, you could tell them, like, shut up. But for them, that's going to take a little bit of time. So you might want to word it in such a way that you would tell them that that's something they need to practice. Like, you know what, Paul, I know that you're an external processor, but sometimes your observations can be a bit much for me. Perhaps a better way of doing it so that you can dutifully serve me better is that you can also try harder to point out what it is that I do good. So you can point out when I do notice a stop sign, when I do actually go when the light turns green. That way, you're pointing out both my strengths and my weaknesses. So then the ISTJ can say, oh, so I have permission to affirm you then. Well, that's nice, because a lot of times ISTJs don't like acting without someone telling them what to do. So if you give the ISTJ permission to do just about anything, that will actually open up a huge gate of possibilities for what those of you who are more on the feeling and intuitive side might be wishing the ISTJ was done all along, but because they respect authority and higher powers, they might not have thought that they were allowed to. So if you say, Paul, I give you permission to cry more, and if their boss says, I order you to cry more, then the ISTJ is going to cry more because they don't want to disobey their higher authority. If it's a friend and you say, I am disappointed in you for not crying enough, then the ISTJ will all of a sudden say, okay, emotions, 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 and keep hitting themselves over and over again until they get the emotions that the person is asking them to do. It makes them sound like extroverted feelers when I word it like that, but it's really their sense of duty. They want to make sure that they're on top of things, that they're the ultimate rule follower. So if you can assert your authority in some kind of way, then the ISTJ is capable of doing just about anything. You can just take every stereotype you've ever thought about the ISTJ and throw it in the trash, because when you've gotten them to the point where they're dutiful instead of just going on the past, oh, they're capable of being just about any type. They're even capable of being an ENFP or an INFJ if you really push them. Well, maybe not an INFJ, but almost any other type. If you really tell them this is your duty, you have to be better. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know if there's anything I missed, because I'm sure I missed a whole lot, because I was rambling for quite a bit of this. And just keep being your awesome selves in the comment section. I have a really good YouTube community, and I hope you'll continue to be both critiquing and affirming in the ways that you do. So until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and you guys are great. Keep it up. Bye.